Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Petaluma's Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee for September 5th, 2023. We're waiting on one committee member, but why don't we start with a roll call and go from there?
Committee Member Perlis.
Here.
Committee Member Pingaro.
Present.
Committee Member Whitley, currently not here. And Committee Member Alice Van Omeren, absent. Chair Reinhardt.
Here? Okay, so we have a quorum anyway, so we can continue. Good, let's do that. So we'll move right into general public comment. And I have at least one speaker card, so I'm going to read the preamble. This is general public comment, during which time the public is invited to make comments on items of public interest that are within the HCPC's subject matter jurisdiction and that are not listed on the current agenda. So we'll have comments limited to 3 minutes. I have one speaker card. Do we have any others or anybody else in the audience wishing to speak? Okay, seeing no one else. Do we have anybody online with a hand raised?
We received one comment. Oh, sorry, that's for the other item. For the general public comments, we received none prior to this meeting.
Okay. All right, well, we have Kathy Myers. Please to the microphone and state your name for the record.
Okay, my name is Kathy Myers. Some of you may have heard about a new city that's popping up in Solano County. It's going to be called California Forever. It's being planned by a group of Silicon Valley billionaires. This utopian city will feature a charming walkable downtown. A train and a river will run through it. And it will have an eclectic mix of home styles and be environmentally green. They'll have urban boundaries and be surrounded by agricultural open space. That sounds familiar. It sounds like they were inspired by Petaluma. What it won't have, however, is any history or authenticity. That is your purview, and that's where you come in, with your mission to preserve and protect our historic districts. But now, a building applicant is using a strategy of a zoning overlay that negates the standards of our downtown design. This is shocking to me, but even more shocking is that the city sees this as an opportunity to expand high-rise building in other targeted areas. The builders of California Forever want their city to be like Petaluma. Our city wants to imitate Upper West Side Manhattan. I don't know where this is coming from. Much remains to be reviewed, of course. The process of the why and the who and the what and the how and when will be clarified. The zoning overlay is like a camel's nose poking into a tent. What might follow could be a big, obnoxious stink. The other strategies that's happening is to label properties in the area in transition or starting improvements, but labeling them as blight. The slides even show graffiti art-rich parking area behind the Phoenix and hint that it is a blighted eyesore. It looks like team spirit to me. Our downtown is just a few acres in need of protection. Now is an opportunity for you to take a strong stance and resolve to preserve the scale and design of Petaluma's #1 asset. It is, after all, the envy of billionaires everywhere.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the audience wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, we will close general public comment and move on to item 1, which is the approval of our minutes from August 1st. Do we have any corrections or deletions or changes? Okay. I just noted that the minutes end with the meeting closed by someone who's not on the committee, so maybe that's a typo. Okay, other than that, let's see, we need a roll call vote.
I move that we accept the minutes as submitted.
Second that.
Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Committee Member Perlis,
Aye.
Committee Member Pitangaro,
Aye.
Committee Member Whitley, absent. Committee Member Van Omeren, absent. Chair Reinhardt.
Aye. Okay, next I'm going to back up a little bit. We have the item of presentations, and I just need to announce that there are no presentations today. So our next item, item 2, public hearings and matters for consideration. This is a public hearing and recommendation to the City of Petaluma Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee to conduct a public hearing and consider a resolution recommending to the Planning Commission approval of a local landmark designation of the barn complex consisting of 3 existing barn structures located on plus or minus 47-acre portion of parcel B of the Scott Ranch. And so on. So this is a public hearing, so I need to ask for any ex parte disclosures. Okay, I'll just report that I did attend a guided tour on the property, and so I've toured it. I've met with, I think, the applicants, and I was there again today, but I didn't go on site and trespass, but I've been there. Okay, so with that, we'll start with a staff presentation by our Historic Preservation Specialist, Isabel Castellano.
Thank you, Chair Reinhardt, and good afternoon to everyone in the audience today. The first item, as introduced by Reinhardt, is the Barn Complex Landmark Designation. And this presentation will mimic the staff report published and shared with the public. It provides, with this presentation, provides an overview of the landmark designation process and the HCPC's role, the background in the project description, the staff analysis regarding the general plan and the IZO, a summary of the environmental review, the outreach and public comments available, and the recommendation. And as part of the work that's implemented through the city, landmark designations are recommended and supported by the general plan through Chapter 3 for historic preservation, ensuring the various types of preservation and rehabilitation throughout the city, and really linking the history that we have in our city and its roots and communities. The other support is through the IZO of Chapter 15 and preservation of cultural and historic environment. Through Chapter 15, it addresses historic resources, including landmarks and other historic resources related to historic districts, and it specifically establishes the procedure to designate a historic resource as a landmark. And when I present today and within the staff report, there is an understanding that local landmark is related to the city of Petaluma. And as part of the designation process through the IZO, first comes through initiation of designation brought forward as an applicant or through the city. With that action requires a recommendation from the HCPC to Planning Commission, and that is why we're here today for this item. And the final action occurs through City Council. As part of the landmark designation, there is the understanding with the zoning map that a historic overlay zone is applied to identify where the historic landmark is located. As part of the notice for designation, it's also provided and recorded within the city, county. And once it's designated as a landmark, there is conformity with Chapter 15 and the Secretary of Interior standards. And this project is before the HCPC for the landmark designation, and the HCPC's role is to determine for finding applicable findings for this landmark if it's compliant with regulations and supported by the general plan and the IZO from the chapter previously mentioned, and specifically the designation process. the HCPC also may consider public comments and consider the proposed conditions of approval linking with the landmark designation. And for this public hearing, it would be recommended to Planning Commission. And a brief introduction to the Scott Ranch project that initiated the landmark designation for these 3 barn structures. The Scott Ranch project has had a lengthy time in its initial submittal from 2004 with a series of public hearings from 2013, 2017, 2018, and up to 2023 of February this year. With the approval of the Scott Ranch project, there was a condition of approval with the resolution for the vesting tentative subdivision maps. And that would be presenting the landmark designation to the HCPC. And this is a brief summary of the additional resolutions associated with the Scott Ranch project. A bit about the site. It's located on 1860 D Street, at the corner of D Street and Windsor Street. Its zoning district is a planned unit development and provides related to the project for the Putnam expansion project. In addition to the site, we have the apartment complex located within Parcel B. As you can see in the images and within the staff reports, the barn complex is located to the southern side of the Parcel B, closest to D Street. And we have here the 3 structures identified between the large barn, the garage storage barn, and the hay barn. Within the site of the barn complex, a bit of its history is located in rural and agricultural and ranching lands. It is associated with the Scott Ranch, formerly known Arnold Scott Estate. Part of this project with the Scott Ranch project is transferring the site from Sonoma County Regional Park to accommodate the Putnam Park extension. This park is also facilitated and supported through the Kelly Creek Protection Project. And I'll briefly talk a bit into the scope of the project, which does include the barn and its future rehabilitation. This is a brief image of the draft concept plans incorporating the barn complex. This is taken from the Scott Ranch as well as from the work done for the Putnam Park expansion. As you can see, there's also work associated with the the Kelly Creek, and I identified in the image the location for the barn complex. There's various parts to this separate project related to bringing the landscape and access to the park itself. Taking a closer look, there are parts of the work that includes the barn complex and the opportunities there to preserve and rehabilitate. For today's discussion, it is for the landmark designation on these 3 existing structures that create the barn complex. We have the large barn, the hay barn, and the garage store. They're each individually structured with concrete support, concrete pier foundation. In terms of the materials, there's also horizontal sidings, structures, the gable roofing, and various aesthetics related to the agricultural context. I did, as part of planning staff and working with the applicant, coordinating and making site visits to determine what are the existing conditions. Since this project has been going on for some lengthy time, from 2003, it has developed other conditions being related to its closeness to the creek. So here are 2 images just demonstrating the type of repair, the type of areas and deterioration that would require repair as part of the rehabilitation efforts. This is to say that there is potential for the structures and that landmark designation would support. And in terms of the staff analysis and the supporting documentations, there have been cultural reports provided, maintained confidential for additional information, but there are directions for local landmark designation. Here we have the staff analysis in terms of the standards of review with the general plan, with policies to preserve the overall scale within residential neighborhoods, within policy 3P1 as well, to protect historic resources and aesthetics. And the landmark designation does fall directly under the policy P68 to preserve the uniqueness of the property, specifically at the intersection of D Street and Windsor Drive for the Scott Ranch. These policies were amended as part of the Scott Ranch project and incorporated since city project work since February. So outlined here, as well as described in the staff report, the policy to preserve the barn complex is supported with this landmark designation. Understanding the existing conditions, its locations, there is an awareness for relocation in the near future for the same general area due to its existing conditions, and which would support the purposes of stabilization in the near future. Within the standards of review in the IZO, Chapter 15 specifically addresses finding structures, special characters, and having that feasibly and preserving them as well. There's also identifying and promoting the utilization and discouragement of decay for structures. It also promotes a healthy and safety awareness for public to practice historic preservation. Further, within Chapter 15, it's really to protect and enhance our existing fabric. Directly, the landmark opportunities that we have are really to preserve what we have in significant examples. And that also extends to maintenance and appropriate settings and environments, enhance property and stabilization within specific areas of the cities. And it really provides a quality within the human life in your neighborhood, in the park service, and creating that living heritage that we have in Petaluma. As briefly mentioned, the supporting documentations through this project for Scott Ranch and the designation of the barn complex, there have been cultural resources developed, and through the resolution for the vesting tentative subdivision map of Condition 10 to preserve and present an application for landmark of the barn complex. This further supports and directs for presenting the barn complex to the HCPC. With the staff report, the cultural resources, and today's presentation, we also have an understanding of the significance and evaluation required to determine its integrity and significance. So briefly, just to summarize, within the criterias, we do have the national and the California, just as reference of what can be associated within a structure, such as the barn complex. But in general, the criterias, whether it's associated for events associated with lives of persons significant in our past, or it embodies a distinctive characteristic of type or period, and lastly, if it yields information within important to prehistory history. Within the barn complex, it overlaps with the opportunities for landmark designation at a local level, not as significant as recorded in the cultural reports within the national or state, but there has been identified through the cultural reports for opportunities of local designation. Further, to support and enhance the application, staff did interpret and are proposing the following to support the application, determining the period of significance for this barn complex within the late and mid-20th century, a significant statement to understand that the barn complex offers a visual prominence within the notable feature for the gateway of D Street, within the aesthetics and agricultural rolling hills that we have in Petaluma. Its features as part of the barn complex have been identified as contributing and non-contributing, understanding that these are architectural features that can be modified, but its appearance and qualities are still there. These are items that we can also continue in conversation for today, because this is presenting to the HCPC with further recommendation to Planning Commission. So briefly to summarize the contributing features generally for barn complexes like these do relate to the horizontal siding on the exterior, the type of gable roofs, generally wood framed windows, a variety of windows and door openings, and the foundation. There's also an understanding of where the barns are existing and where it needs to be removed and how that configuration takes into place. There, as part of the staff analysis, we also provided an assessment of integrity. Supported with the cultural reports, staff also finds and concurs with assessments, and this also provides an integrity understanding within the 7 significance with location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And this is the general process to analyze local districts, historic landmarks, or any type of historic resources, providing a significance, identifying features, and making an assessment of integrity. And I'll briefly summarize as it is identified in the staff report as well. The assessments of integrity is in the location where the barn complex is, understanding that it's in a general area within the agricultural field related to the setting as well, providing a landscape of grassy hills where these barn complex can be of aesthetic quality. The design, understanding the very simplified architectural features that it has, and understanding the materials that are existing, knowing that there are some rehabilitations that would be required to use the building as part of the park extension, understanding the workmanship that's already taken place and can be further developed with the use as a utilitarian set of buildings. And part of having a landmark is having that feeling and association. It's more than a building that you walk by, but that you have some recollection and expresses history as part of the context that we have in the city. Briefly to summarize the environmental review, as part of the project at Scott Ranch, there was an environmental impact report and has been approved and certified by City Council back in February, and it does extend towards this landmark designation. There is compliance as well with CEQA that the landmark designation is exempt because of this action of regulatory with agencies, that there's support and insurance to protect the environment, such as landmark designations. And as part of the public outreach and noticing, this was a public hearing, so there are steps and measures put in place to seek out those public outreach within the community. It was noticed in the Argus. It was also provided a public notice within and provided and mailed to tenants within 1,000 feet of the project site. It was also provided with 2 signages on Windsor Street and D Street. Along with the signage requirements, it was appropriate for the setting, and there was, from drafting the presentation, there was no written public comments received. From this public hearing, as recommendation with staff analysis, moving forward, the landmark recommendation to Planning Commission and having consideration today for subject to conditions of approval. And again, I do want to address that this is a landmark designation moving forward in various steps, presenting here today for HCPC, moving forward to Planning Commission, and the last review really is with City Council, and that would make the final designation. So as part of the staff report and today's presentation, staff has provided recommendations and conditions of approval to move forward with the landmark designation. We may further discuss that today and have as recommendations moving forward to Planning Commission. Briefly to summarize the conditions provided in the draft resolution is part of the noticing for the CEQA notice of exemption, filing it with the Northwest Information Center to really preserve all that information as part of the barn complex. it also includes appropriate and chemical and physical treatments where appropriate, provided and possible to avoid damage to historic materials. And the third condition, as part of protecting any archaeological resources, to take appropriate measures when there's anything discovered in ground disturbing activities. And really these three conditions are generally applied to any historic resources as a standard practice. Continuing the conversation for the proposed conditions of approvals, we are aware that the project is as part of an extension and rehabilitation. So we do want to support the landmark designation and its future use as rehabilitated measures with the Putnam Park expansion, and really supporting anything that comes through maintenance and repairs, stabilization, and future rehabilitation through administrative review. And this would really support a time appropriateness moving forward with the project. There is also an awareness of the barn complex and its configuration, identifying that as a relationship. And the last note in terms of understanding where the discretionary review would be applied really would fall under and include demolition of a landmark. So this is a general note understanding that when the landmark is designated and if there's any demolition that falls under the resolution that we have in place, it would go through a discretionary process. And this hearing is for moving forward and discussing part of the landmark designation and taking that to Planning Commission. We can have further discussions and have questions for staff. I do want to mention that in the audience, we do have available for answers from the applicant side as well. And I'd like to identify our individuals related to the Helen Putnam Park Regional Park. We have Peter Cohen, founder of the program with Helen Putnam and Kelly Creek. We do have Tamara Gallanter. We have Steve Abbs, and I believe we're anticipating Steve Erwitt as well from Sonoma County Regional Parks. This concludes my presentation, and I'd like to bring it back to the chair.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. Would the applicant team like to add anything or have a presentation? Okay, none? Oh, good. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Erwitt. I'm the planning manager for Sonoma County Regional Parks, and I've been involved with this project for at least 15 years. What a delight it is to be here on this topic. And thank you, City of Petaluma. Thank you, Ms. Hines. We really appreciate the partnership with the city and really working together to provide something really important for the community here. We do have some proposed adjustments for the conditions of approval, and I'll explain. Would it be possible to put the statement of significance back up, please?
Yes.
I think it's there we go.
Trying to find.
Yeah, you're close.
Yes.
You're really close. Maybe the one before or after it?
No, I think this one.
There we go. Second one. Thank you. So I'll read it aloud. Statement of significance. The barn complex is significant due to its visual prominence as a notable feature at the city's gateway on D Street, for its setting within Rolling Hills, and for its association with Petaluma's agricultural past, as the barn structures were used for agricultural purposes. For decades and decades, the community is used to seeing this from D Street. This is visual. It's the look and feel. And what we want to do is we want to kind of right-size the conditions of approval to that statement of significance. So we actually do have experience managing historic buildings, and as you all know, it is expensive and complex and important. And in this case, it really isn't truly historic. It's important to the community. We recognize that. We agree to that. But there's some of the details, and would it be possible to put the conditions back up, please? I guess one of the first things is the Secretary of the Interior standards are extraordinarily challenging and very, very expensive. The process is laborious. Down the road on Lakeville at Tule Lake Regional Park, we have a whole collection of we have, I think, 5 historic barns. It's about 20 buildings on the complex. Not unlike this, but much larger. And it's been a real challenge to maintain it. It's been a challenge to reuse it. And that actually is fully historic as well. So our first ask would be to not tie it to the Secretary of Interior standards. Those are made for a much, much higher level protection than really what our mission is here today. Our mission is that the look and feel, the aesthetics, is consistent with the agricultural heritage. And we can do that without those standards whatsoever. Another aspect of it is the materials. So the materials, it can be challenging. Fire code has changed, building code changes all the time, sustainability targets change. And so we believe that there ought to be a little bit more flexibility in materials. Again, the bar here is visual. So we want to be able to preserve that look and feel. But if we're able to do it more cost effectively or better for the environment with a different material, then we should be allowed to do that. And so in some cases, this has resulted in us not being able to fix windows in some of our existing historic structures just down the road, where we are trying to reuse them. And it's challenging. It's a real burden for our Public Parks Department, which is why we're taking it on here, opposed to, say, the city taking it on. We have a little bit more depth to do that. The next one is the configuration. So we all recognize stream setback and riparian protections have come a long ways since this barn was constructed directly over a creek bank. And the conditions of approval here and also for the full EIR recognize the importance of ultimately relocating that away from an eroding creek bank that is experiencing increasing flash floods. But the catch is, the way it reads right now is that which establishes a relationship between the 3 structures shall be preserved. We'd like to soften that a little bit. So we're proposing that, again, it's the look and feel. It's kind of the spacing, it's kind of the dimensions. We don't know yet because we haven't done the tests, say, for the geotechnical. We don't know if we have to move all 3 structures to maintain that preservation of the geometry, or if we're able to just scoot the big barn 8-10 feet over, everyone's happy, it still has a similar look and feel. We don't know. So typically, we have to look a little closer at the soils. We have to look together on once we do have recommendations about where to put it, what the other dimensions would be. Maybe those other 2 buildings also need to move and everything is just lifted and put over, but maybe it's slightly changed. We're not trying to change the intent of this. We're just trying to change the kind of the technical aspect. And then the concrete piers is kind of the last one along this line of thought. Sometimes geotechs recommend grade beams. The soils notoriously are challenging. So we'd like a little flexibility in the foundation. If we need to do a facade so it looks like there's piers, that's okay. That part's cheap, that's inexpensive. I'm not sure how valuable that is, but we're open to that. So in summary, we're delighted for the collection of buildings to receive landmark status, and we want to preserve this going forward. The way we're likely to use this is through education. So this is going to be a place for environmental education, which includes agricultural. We run the largest environmental ed program in the county. We have accredited school teachers. We have subsidized school bus program. So that's how we've envisioned using this. So our position is the look and feel is going to be preserved with any sort of common sense adjustment. And the actual agricultural history and feeling is actually going to be executed even more through the education. And the more we can cost efficiently use this place and adapt it, the better off we'll be. And I don't, I can't even speculate how ADA could come into play and so on. We know even if we're legally right, optically that may not be the right position in this day and age. So we're trying to balance all needs. We think we can do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Glad you're here. Okay, any other presentations or additional information from the applicant team? Okay, seeing none, let's, before we open public comment, why don't we bring it back to the committee for questions of staff or the applicant? Anybody have any questions? Committee Member Perlis?
Just following up, a question following up the presentation we just heard, and this is addressed to staff. Can we designate a structure as a landmark structure in Petaluma and decouple it from the Secretary of Interior standards? I think that's pretty tightly woven together in our statutes, isn't it?
And to respond to your comment, committee member, the Secretary of Interior standards are generally recommendations and guidance. Really, historic resources are so unique and vary in historic contexts, and that's where the review and planning review occurs, understanding its historic context, its settings, and where it is appropriate and when it's not. Understanding that this barn complex is located near the creek, there's directions for appropriate uses of materials, foundations, types, recommendations through geotechnical or engineers, and that's part of the guidance, really, to understand how the historic resources can be rehabilitated to its appropriate uses. And that's a conversation that is part of the projects for the barn complex, and it's really to support and preserve the historic resource. What I can see is the opportunity for the softness of the language within these conditions, whether there is recommendations, understanding compliance versus guidance that would feel more comfortable in moving that direction, specifically with the language provided. But again, the Secretary of Interior standards are those recommendations, guidance, site-specific features, and it's really to support what we have. And that comes down when we have the technical studies, when we have the design concepts in place, working with the applicants and really seeing what's the appropriate measures. And again, this is for moving forward administratively, and understanding that this project is through a draft as well. And I'm hoping that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you.
Committee Member Pingaro, questions?
Yeah, just a couple. Who's the actual applicant under?
The applicant falls under, for the developer, Daviron, bringing this forward through the Scott Ranch project, and it is working with the Putnam project expansion and the Kelly Creek. So having various members from the committees and groups here today really supporting the landmark designation. But this was brought forward through the Scott Ranch project, the tentative subdivisions, and the conditions we have in place to meet those planning approvals.
Okay. And this kind of, I think, piggybacks a little bit on Commissioner Perlis's question, but in reading the existing materials, at least from what I could tell, it seems as though the EIR made a determination that there was no historical significance, and now we're coming back and saying that there might be some to necessitate a landmark designation, and I wasn't quite clear how we were sort of supposed to square those two conclusions. And it may be just a question of what standards are we really applying for this as compared to what they did in the EIR, but it wasn't exactly clear, off the bat from reading the report and the supporting materials. And then I think the follow-up to that is, obviously, I heard the commentary and read in the report too that the cultural resources evaluation was kept confidential, and I'm also reading in the report that it was part of the application. So I'm curious why we didn't have the opportunity to review that if it was part of the application. And this is it. I was asking whether or not the location of the barns had a role in the historical value, and it sounded like from the applicant's team that is a big part of this. So anyway, those were my just questions as I went through the materials.
I see Ms. Hines has some experience here. Maybe you could.
Yeah, if I can just help with that first question. So it is a unique situation. So the barns were evaluated under the state California Environmental Quality Act. They were determined not to be significant under state standards for listing. The local standards have a little more room to them. I think, and don't quote me on this, but it says something like unique characteristics, local importance. So when the general plan was adopted in 2008, that policy existed in the general plan, and it came, I wasn't there, but I think it came from really that significance of you're driving on D Street and there is this visual resource. It is not necessarily that any one of these barns are an exemplary example of a barn or somebody specific lived in that barn, or, it's not quite the same caliber as the state requirements for listing, but there was a connection at the local community level of this is something that's important to us. It reflects something Petaluma, and we want to make sure it's preserved. So while it wasn't found to be eligible for listing at the state level, it continued to be an important part for us to consider listing it as a local landmark to maintain that visual reminder of Petaluma history. And that's why kind of to Mr. Errett's point about that visual resource, it's less about every single board and it's more about the ability to drive, walk, now to, use that site once it's got public access on it and be able to see those barns and that rural context. Does that help?
Thank you. And then you had another question regarding the documentation that was provided and was not provided.
Yeah, I guess the follow-up was, it seemed to me that in the staff report, there was an indication that the application was submitted with the cultural resource report with it, but that it was withheld for confidentiality reasons. And I don't know that we were provided a copy of the report. So I'm just curious why it was separated out.
Sure, and I do want to reach out to our legal assistants with Dylan here as well for that question. But generally, when HREs have additional content related to archaeological resources or additional information to the large parcel that we have in hand, that information is really held out from the public awareness, and we're very careful on the information that's provided to public hearings like today. Just understanding that we can provide summaries, we can provide redacted versions, and that's something that we can consider as part of this application moving forward to Planning Commission. And we can reach out to other directions as well of CEQA and resources and information provided.
Yeah, I would think a redacted report would be appropriate, right? If it was submitted as part of the application, we just keep the portions that are related to this specific application.
Yeah, Commissioner Piningardo, I don't know the specifics for that, but I can back up Isabel here if like tribal studies and architecture, those are confidential under specific statutes. So I don't know why this one was confidential, but we can look into that for you. Yeah.
Any additional questions? No. Okay, great. I have several. A couple have been covered, but I'd like to just go through them one at a time. First of all, again, with regard to the documentation, has there been a historic structures report or any evaluation of the existing conditions or what it would take to stabilize the buildings?
That's part of the phase one from the Putnam expansion project. So there is an awareness of the level of detail and studies required. I don't believe it's been initiated, and that's something that would come before building permits, understanding its existing conditions.
Building permits for work on the barns or building permits for subdivision work or home building?
Well, you're asking for the barn complex itself?
Yep.
Okay. So generally, yes, we would require all that additional information when the project is ready and to move forward, understanding its existing conditions at a technical level, and what are those appropriate measures. But I do want to share with the committee that moving forward with a landmark designation, it's really what are the features that we have that we want to preserve, and what are those technical studies that we anticipate as part of a larger rehabilitation project.
Okay. So if I'm clear on that, you're saying that these reports, these analyses have not been done and they will be done by after the landmark designation. So that my next question then is, I'm trying to understand the timeline here. And if this landmark designation is like a critical milestone in the entitlement process for the land development project and the dedication of the property, so I guess the question there is, can the land development project move forward without the landmark designation?
I'd like to extend that question to Heather Hines, as she's been more appropriate with the history of the project, and that is part of the vesting conditions of approval as well.
Thank you.
Hi again. So the condition number 10 doesn't require designation, it requires consideration of designation. Obviously, when those entitlements were going through, we didn't want to do something to limit our discretionary process. So the way it is worded, I believe, is that there will be consideration of landmark designation and the other entitlements. That is a milestone for the other entitlements, the transfer of the property. But if we consider it and it is decided not to designate it, then it's been considered and those other entitlements can move forward.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Next question then. Okay, there's mention too of a potential, I don't know where that would come, but federal dollars that might trigger a Section 106 compliance. And I know that Mr. Ertz was asking about, latitude and the Secretary of Interior standards. But do you foresee any Section 106 requirement here?
The Section 106, I believe, was part of the Scott Ranch project. This hearing for a recommendation of landmark, so there's no project that would seek a federal funding as part of the hearing today.
Got it. So not on the table. Okay. Let's see. Do we know, is there any bond or annuity associated with the land deal for maintenance or any of this work like the HSR that would be required, any of the studies? Does anybody know? I understand there's sort of a confidential deal, agreement with the land deal, but I want to know if there's any money that comes with the buildings and the property for stabilization, really.
And I'd also like to extend the questions to the applicants as part of the the funding available. As part of the landmark designation, there's no funding provided through the city. But there are foreseen opportunities, part of the Putnam expansion, and we are aware that there are maintenance repairs required. So we don't want to uphold any discretionary review just to replace windows, roofing, and all those features that we understand are appropriate through an administrative level. And I'd like to extend the conversation for any funding questions.
So it is my understanding that part of the agreement between Earth Island Institute and regional parks is that there will be certain steps that Earth Island Institute will complete prior to the transfer of the parcel to regional parks. One of those components is stabilization of the barn complex. So not full rehabilitation or anything, but just enough stabilization, because that one barn is basically overhanging into the creek bed. So stabilization so that they're out of imminent danger of demolition, but not replacing all the windows or those things. Does that clarify?
It does. Thank you very much. Okay, one last question then. It seems to me that landmark designation also requires a deed restriction placed on the property. And so I would expect that we'd have a draft of that in the resolution. Is that not the case?
The landmark designation, it puts an overlay on the property, not a deed restriction.
Not a deed restriction.
No, it's an overlay, so it'll be like,
Yeah.
you know,
Overlay.
R1-H. So that gives anyone a kind of immediate notification if you were looking on the GIS map or anything like that, that there is something, and then it would connect to the resolution, which lays out why is it important, what's important about it, what, if any, limitations.
Yeah, which is the one before us, or
Right.
at least in, right. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all the questions I have. Any follow-up questions from any other committee members?
Yeah, just one follow-up on that. The thought of, is there consideration given to whether or not, rather than pursuing a landmark designation, that a condition of approval would just be a deed restriction on the property preserving the structures? If we can't make the findings for a landmark designation?
I do want to take an initial step to your response to that question, really to have Chapter 15, the IZO, to protect historic resources. It's either a landmark, a local landmark, or a property within a historic district. And that's what we have in place to preserve unique features. And understanding that there's limitations. We don't have merit programs or things like that. And deed restrictions, to the question you had, Chair, those are related to landmark and heritage trees. So there's methods to track those. But really, when you have a historic resource, a landmark, it's identifiable. We have that in record. We can trace it through GIS. And those are features we can identify and have those labeled and supported through the IZO.
Agree completely that it gives for city staff. You don't often ask for a copy of the deed to see deed restrictions if somebody comes in, you know, for everything that comes across the counter with the city. I'm also thinking that the Sonoma County may not want to take a property with a deed restriction on it. So that's kind of another complexity, because this is a win-win for everyone involved in this transfer and this preservation of this property. So I'm guessing that that is a kind of a no-go on that side of things.
Perlis?
A follow-up question. Heather, what is the relationship then for the property if it's part of a regional park And is it still actually part of the city? And who has what to say about it then?
It is still within the city, so it's still within city limits. It does not change the boundaries of the city. It is owned by parks, and typically there has not been a lot of, I think we had this conversation before. We are all trying to work together at the moment. We're all trying to work together to understand the limitations and, set Sonoma Regional Parks up for success, set preservation of the barns up for success, similarly with some of the biological resource conservation efforts that will be on this property, so that everyone knows the standards. But I do not believe, and Dylan might be able to make sure I'm not misspeaking, I do not believe once Regional Parks owns it, that Regional Parks has to come in and get a building permit for everything they do on that property.
And I would agree.
So this is, and it's one of the reasons why Mr. Arrett is here. Mr. Arrett, is looking closely at those conditions, because they want to make sure that they can operate the park and there's not conditions that are so onerous that they can't afford to maintain it, or they can't, do some of the programming they want to do on this property. And also so that they know what the expectation is, and we're all working together towards that common understanding.
Okay. Okay, great. So now I think we have an opportunity for public comment with regard to this matter. So do we have anybody in the audience wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, do we have anybody on our electronic hands raised online?
We received one public comment for this item prior to the meeting. It will be posted online
Okay.
tomorrow.
So, yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, so seeing none, we'll close the public comment period, and that, I think, brings a conclusion to the public hearing, and at which time we'll bring it back to the committee for comments and discussion. So who would like to begin? Committee
Yeah,
member Pingarro? Yeah.
I don't know that there's much more to comment on. I guess it's sort of giving some consideration to what to do with these conditions of approval or the requests from Sonoma County Parks.
And Commissioner Pinagaro, if I may interrupt, if it helps assuage or alleviate your concerns here, this is just recommendation. So it will ultimately be city council. So it's the start of the NFL season. Maybe you have the ability to punt here a little bit while staff and the applicant kind of work out these conditions. So I don't want to get ahead of you, but maybe there could be a motion to approve with these conditions that the applicant highlights here for staff and the applicant to really come back and think those through before they get to city council.
If the conditions get reworked, do they have to come back to HCPC?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I don't have any further comment then.
Do you have any reaction to Parks' request to modify the conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of it makes a lot of sense if we are not tied to Secretary of Interior standards, that we probably don't want to condition it to have to meet those same standards. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I guess part of what I was getting at with some of the earlier commentary was, what really are the landmark designation standards that can or should be applied here, as opposed to Secretary of Interior standards, and do we use that as a basis for modifying these conditions of approval? And I don't know that I know the answer to that right now.
And Commissioner Pinagaro, I am looking at the findings for the HSPAR, and it's specifically 15040, and please, Isabel, let me know if I'm wrong here. But it says you will consider the Secretary's standards, but the findings, and then sorry, it's not 15040, it's 15. it looks like the findings are unrelated to the Secretary of Standards. So it may be even possible to get rid of that condition that says must be in conformance or in compliance with the Secretary's. I think that's right. Andrew, Isabel, Heather?
Seems like the way I read it, we do have some latitude. I mean, it does say right in there that, or other conditions as may be imposed or something to that effect. So I think we have that flexibility.
I would agree.
Committee Member Perlis?
Is this an appropriate time to discuss specifics of the resolution?
Sure.
Okay, could we have the resolution put up?
One moment, please.
Sure.
Is there a particular page?
We could start with the Petaluma General Plan, point number 2. Get past all the whereases and to the, get to the therefores.
And staff caught that one during the presentation, and we have some revised language to suggest
Oh,
for that number 2.
well, yeah, number 2, but I would like to have it up there because I have my notes, but they require, unfortunately, my screen isn't working, which isn't helping. Thank you. You can just keep going until you get to the now therefores. And Petaluma General Plan. Next page, please. Okay, item number 2. What is this two-story residential building doing here?
It's an error.
Oh, good.
And so I think how it should read is, let's see. The project is consistent with the site's land use designation of very low density residential and furthers preservation of the Red Barn complex consistent with policy 2P68 and in accordance with chapter 3 historic preservation.
Okay.
If that would be staff's suggestion. It was just incorrect from a previous project.
Thank you. It was confusing. Next on the resolution is policy 1P3 below. How is this linked to our considerations?
I do want to provide a response for that. This is really to address the other neighborhoods around the property, understanding that there are residential properties addressed with the Scott Ranch project.
But how is it, I think your specific question, committee member, was how is this in your consideration? Every land use decision we try to make here has horizontal or vertical consistency with the general plan. So there are other general plan consistencies, the policy 2P68, 3P1 here. So if you believe that this policy 1P3 isn't in conformance with the general plan, this land use action, we can just strike that if that's what you and the other committee members think.
Oh, I just didn't see how it applied to landmark status for the barn complex is all. Next, under policy 2P68, bullet number 3, this has been I've been partially satisfied with this now that I've heard from Mr. Eric that the park will attempt to take the visual continuity of the site into account. But do we need to have some better definition of same general area than just somewhere on the parcel. It's a fairly large thing. I understand that, you know, I understand what what we're trying to do here and what Parks is trying to do here. I just wonder if we need better specificity in the instruction. For instance, if there was a sub-parcel designation of parcel B that included the complex and said it had to stay on there. But
That could be to designate a smaller area, and that would be the general area, that the barns can't be relocated outside of that general area. Oh, I think Mr. Eric would like to respond to that.
Do we need to reopen the public hearing, or can, no, good.
You're okay, Chair.
One of the other aspects of this transition is the funding. And some of the funding is coming from the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation Open Space District, part of the matching grant program. The Kelly Creek Project got 2 grants, which is miraculous. With that comes a conservation easement. That's going to cover the entire 47 acres or thereabouts. Within that conservation easement will be a building envelope that permanently, that's the deed restriction you're looking for. So we will be bound within a polygon, and the open space district will not want the roads to go further up at all. There's going to be right and tight. They're not going to want it on the other side of the creek, either fork. It's going to be right there. In fact, if you go further up, there's other limitations on soils and everything. So part of their goal is visual openness. So they're always trying to keep buildings and structures clustered. So even without a landmark designation, that will be the result of this process.
thank you very much, Mr. With that assurance, I'd release that my point there. Finally, the IZO bullets. Oh, I'm sorry. We still need the resolution up, if you would. Just past where we were.
Okay, I'll put it back up.
If you continue further along until we get to IZO bullets 6 and 7. So could somebody explain to me what these 2 points actually mean?
So in terms of the information, just noting the location of where the barn complex is located, this is noting that it's not changing the land of use. It's not making any changes through this landmark designation for the IZO and the existing zoning. And then the second, for number 7, it's a summary of noting the consistency with Chapter 15 once it's designated, and having that, knowing no adversely effects with support of a landmark designation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Committee Member Perlis. Okay. I have several comments, but first I just want to say that I'm really glad that Regional Parks is here and that the applicant team is here. And I think this discussion so far has been kind of enlightening for me. Just start by saying, you know, the application, the materials we received seemed somewhat anonymous. You know, there was no applicant listed. This whole project has been sort of contentious, and there have been, you know, not knowing about the timing and the timeline and the milestones that need to be accomplished. it just seemed like this was a sort of a perfunctory exercise where we were supposed to check the box and it could move forward, and there's nothing to say about it. And then thinking that, and then knowing that they're, so just having you here and what you've said, I really absolutely support this moving forward as a landmark, and I support allowing regional parks the flexibility to make the site accessible and useful to the fullest extent possible. But I still have two, I think, major concerns that sort of initially really affected my ability to, want to act on this today. First of all, when considering all the gateways to Petaluma, this one seems to be the one that kind of conveys the historic integrity of our downtown, of town, and the best connection of Petaluma's historic character. All the other gateways have somehow been degraded, but always. But this one, both coming and going, really is kind of a transition, and it's a reminder. So, and it's not just the buildings. The cultural resources assessment, identified that its integrity is intact on all levels. And to me, I believe that it's the site, not the entire site, but the setting of the barn complex, the creek, the entry drive, all of that, to me, is the landmark, that makes the gateway to Petaluma. So, my feeling was that the HCPC should really have a site meeting and with the topographic map in hand and actually establish, is it a landmark site or is it 3-building landmark, and maybe it's, from the creek to D Street to the buildings and a smaller area around it. And that would actually create the building envelope within which the buildings could move. So, and at the same time, having a site landmark as opposed to these buildings being the landmark would still allow the city to retain some control over, what actually can happen. Again, I think we all agree we want it to be the most useful it can be, but at the same time, we don't want to lose what it means to the city, as this setting type of a landmark. So in my opinion, I think it should be a landmark site more than 3 buildings. And I think it's worthy of, a meeting on site to establish that. That's point number one. Secondly, though, and this one I think I'm feeling a little more comfortable with, but, I was thinking, it seems like we require more documentation for a single-family home remodel than we were given for this, even though it's got an environmental, an EIR, and it's been through 10 years of environmental review. A historic structures report would be like the minimum baseline analysis of the conditions here. And I was really just concerned that Kelly Creek and regional parks didn't know what they were getting into. I mean, I think of historic buildings, unoccupied buildings like this, as kind of like time bombs, And I just felt that this developer was just dropping the time bomb on a nonprofit. I mean, I follow Kelly Creek Protection Project, and I get the emails, and I see they're asking for donations to put roofs on the buildings, and that kind of worries me because I think there's much more significant work to be done just to stabilize them. What I've seen when I was there a couple of years ago, and in Isabel's photographs, some of those footings are undermined and the piers are failing, and I think that some work needs to be done sooner. So my reaction to that was that we shouldn't really allow this transfer to occur until it's known what's going to be required to stabilize these. Understanding now that the designation isn't the trigger here; it's just our consideration. I still would encourage, a historic structures report and some preliminary engineering design be done sooner rather than later. And I would like to add that as a condition of approval. I don't know how that would work. But, again, knowing that Regional Parks is committed to this and looks like you put a lot more thought into it than we were, we had no idea. We're not told that you had even, were participating in this so much. So it's been informative to have you here. My initial recommendation was going to be that we move to continue this hearing and to a future date when we can have the committee meet on site and consider it as a site, a landmark site, rather than the buildings, and that we would require these documentation. But I'm not sure I want to go that way. I think I would be curious to know what the other committee members feel about that, or if staff or the applicant has a reaction.
I do want to point out that there was a structural evaluation of the main barn, the garage, and the small storage structures in 2008 that is part of the record with the EIR. So there is, I know that 2008 was a while ago, but it's something that indicates, and I know that all three of the parties that make up the applicant team here have walked and looked at that site. I can't imagine how many times this group has walked that site. During the entitlement process, that was part of it, is getting people out there as much as possible to walk the site and give guided tours to point things out. So just adding those two things in, that it is not, I don't think, and somebody can kick me from this team, but I don't think there's any feeling of total surprise coming into this with the condition of the structures. Correct. Yeah. Great. Tamara?
Hi, Tamara Gallanter on behalf of the Kelly Creek Protection Project and Earth Island Institute. So we are in the process of doing a structural evaluation to see what is needed in order to stabilize the barns, and we redid the roof, stabilized that a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe it's been 5 now, and that needs to be redone as well. And those will both occur prior to the transfer to parks. This hearing and everything that goes on, up to the city council needs to occur in order for the transfer to occur under the condition of approval. So we'd like to move forward so we can get to the Planning Commission and the city council, and then Earth Island Institute can take title to the property, and we can do the improvements that are needed before the barns, further deteriorate. So that would be our preference.
Great. While you're up then, could I just
Yes,
ask
of course.
one more question of you? My understanding of the phase 1 was that it was mostly erosion control and bank stabilization, and is there actual building stabilization included in the phase 1?
Yes, there is, and phase 1 also includes the parking lot, the lower parking lot. It includes the portion of the trail that goes from the Red Barns to the edge, that northern trail to the edge of the park. And also, so it does include other elements. Certainly the restoration piece is, very important to the Earth Island Institute. And so that is our primary focus right now. And we're getting the permits needed from the resource agencies in order to move forward. But certainly the roof stabilization and making sure these barns don't deteriorate further is a big priority.
Great. Thank you. Good to hear. So I want to just go back. Oh, do you want to add? Please do. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to comment on a couple items. Really appreciate the comment about time bomb. And we've been concerned about this. We have experienced many. But this is why Kelly Creek and Earth Island stepping up to try to protect what's important to the community. While the developer has not been dropping a time bomb, but they've been extraordinarily flexible in trying to meet the needs of the community. So I was standing right here with some of the folks here when all the watercolors had the paintings of the Red Barn, many city council meetings, 8 years ago or whatever it was. It means a lot. So we're trying to find the balancing point between all these different interests, the practicality of our management and trying to reduce our overhead, trying to do the right thing, trying to have the nonprofit take it as far as they can to set us up for success. So we're really trying to balance all that, which is why we're asking for the flexibility. Thank you.
Great. Understood. Thank you. Okay. I'd like some clarification too. I mean, it was also said that once Regional Parks owns the property, even though it's within the city, that we would kind of no longer have jurisdiction from a design review standpoint. Is that true? Or, I mean, if so, the landmark status really doesn't have a lot of meaning, right? And this is kind of leading into my discussion, my question about making it a landmark site. I mean, is there any point to that? Because my goal there is, again, to just make sure that we're preserving the setting, which I think kind of is the landmark there, the barns within that setting and at that location. And by landmarking the site, it seems like we would maintain some review authority over what the final design of and the location of the buildings are. Is that true or not?
Chair, can I just ask for a little clarification? So when we do a landmark designation, the designation goes on the site. Am I understanding you less on the specific mechanism, but more what you find significant for landmark designation? So it might be changing, modifying, and I think this is somewhat what Mr. Ehret was referring to. There's in the resolution, there's a statement, I think it's number 9, about basically what you're finding significant about it. And it might be changing that to say that that you're finding, you're finding the barn complex significant as a local landmark given its unique visual gateway of Petaluma's agricultural past as seen from D Street within the backdrop of the rolling hills, something to make it a little less about, or even going as far as saying the local landmark is based on the site's unique local context, visual corridor, not individual structures or specific architectural detailing. Because I think what you're trying to say is it's all about the visual corridor, not that bracket on the roof of the barn, because we're not finding the individual barn structures necessarily significant as local landmarks. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, you're right on it. Right. I mean, as it's written, it says the horizontal siding, the gable ends, the forms, and what I'm saying is the setting as well. I mean, those are all important characteristics. I would like to give regional parks the latitude to make those, but I also think that we should maintain review authority just to make sure that it meets the intent of our gateway landmark. So I think that would require, some cooperation and some probably give and take with regional parks to come up with language that works for everybody. But I still think it's our charge, as a committee here, is to look at this as what it really is, which is a landmark site, and it's a gateway, and it's important for those things. So, I'd like to find a way to move this forward, but I think a recommendation would be when it goes to Planning Commission that the resolution's rewritten, the boundary, the actual landmark footprint is expanded to include a portion of the site. Exactly what that is, I can't say right now, but I don't know. And this is just me too. I don't know if the committee members agree, but before we talk about it, I want to make sure that's not a non-starter, and Steve's going to walk out of the room, and so I mean, is this something that we
Yeah,
see?
right now, the way it is, the landmark site is the landmark would be applied to the site. And what I think would be the most effective way is to modify the statement of significance, what you're finding significant about it. Because in 10 years, theoretically, that's what's going to be looked at. And if it's changing that number 9 to really find what you find significant about it and being clear that it's the site, this site will have a conservation easement on it. That's part of the condition. So the site is not going to all of a sudden have a housing development on it, because that's part of the condition. So you're going to be guaranteed that open feel behind it. You then have the further regional park. So there's not going to be change there. You've already got some really good, assurances that the larger backdrop. And so I think it's really, I think that would be the most helpful thing, is to look at what the statement of significance is in the resolution and character defining. Maybe the character defining have nothing to do with the siting or the piers. They have to do with the relationship of the barns. I don't know, is it important for them to stay red? But really what is it that you're looking at and saying that's what makes it that heartstring to the community? That's what makes it special. That's what makes it unique.
Agreed. I think those are important, but I think there's some latitude. But yeah, expanding the statement of significance. And so that would be my recommendation, is that we add conditions of our recommendation, one being to expand the statement of significance to include a portion of the site to be determined. Also, to allow latitude for regional parks to, have some flexibility of this applicable standards for, latitude from the Secretary of the Interior standards, but also that the landmark is still subject to Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee design review for the final site plan. I'm okay too with administrative review of minor building moves, things like that, but I really think the action, all that action should occur once the park master plan is approved or the design is approved, or is at least worked out, concept is worked out. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that should come back to this committee to make sure that the park master plan in its next phase of design should come back to the committee to make sure that it's not in conflict with our need to preserve this gateway. Does any of that make sense? So just trying to preserve some sort of review authority over the future of the site. And I should say that the park master plan wasn't included in this staff report, so if it's finalized now, I've seen it and that's fine. I just I have a different attitude towards this than I had this morning,
So there is no proposed changes in the current plan. So like mentioned earlier, there are certain things that Earth Island Institute has committed to doing before giving it to regional parks, but that does not involve any changes to the Red Barn other than shoring them for stability. So they're not planning to move the Red Barns as part of that initial, and there are no plans after that at this point. So I don't think Parks knows what's next after that, correct? Steve?
At some point, there is going to be an approved master plan and construction documents and all that before the park is implemented, I'm assuming. So that's where I'm headed.
Our understanding is what's adopted is what we would consider the park master plan. So we have 60 parks. Some have 30, 40, 50-year-old master plans. What we find is 30 years is the shelf life, typically. Putnam, we originally bought it mid-'80s. This is the third expansion. The 3 expansions are in city limits. So the jurisdiction, is reasonable questions, right? We cannot foresee necessarily, are we going to find a big donor who wants to completely fund a highly usable barn, keeping everything ideal on the outside, and maybe that means relocating it because of the code triggers. As you know well, you tug on one part of the building, you have to upgrade this, now you have to upgrade that. All these, can be a domino, so we don't know, but we want to leave that opening. So right now, it's true what Ms. Hines said, there are no plans, but we know enough to know that long term, We don't know. We know that we'd have to do CEQA if anything is different than the adopted master plan. And we're just fine, having a conversation with the Future Landmarks Commission and so on. We have to deal with the county one from time to time. So it's part of our daily business. So we don't expect to be changing the master plan, but future generations don't know. But the conservation easement is going to protect probably 90-something% of what you're trying to protect. Thank you.
Good, thank you. I don't recall reading reference to the conservation easement either, so that's good news, I guess. Okay, well, do you have any response to the idea of a site versus buildings, either of you? John?
I have a slightly larger view response. I think that it is unfortunate that the best thing that the city has to bring to bear on this particular project is landmark status. It doesn't feel right. It won't be implemented in a way that you would expect landmark status to be implemented if it was a structure in private hands or something like that. But if it's what we need to do to allow an important project to move along, and as far as I'm concerned, we can vote on it, and I suppose I would vote positively. But the quibble, not quibble, but the distinction between site versus building complex, I'm not sure it would make enough difference to that I would feel strongly one way or the other. It's a bad fit. It's the best we have apparently, and I don't know what we can do about it.
Yeah, the way I understand it, I feel like this is going to apply to the whole legal parcel, right? So whether we call out a smaller portion of it or a larger portion, the designation goes on the whole parcel as opposed to just the structure. So I think we're covered in that sense. I made the comment earlier about a deed restriction. Lo and behold, I mean, a conservation easement is essentially the same exact thing, right? Without knowing sort of what the full context of that is, I feel like that conservation easement probably takes care of most of the concerns that we have here right now. I'm assuming there's some sort of view shed component that goes with it as well that says you can't change the view here, the colors, those sorts of things. Without that context, it's a little bit difficult for us to, and I think that's part of the reason why we're struggling here is that we don't have that added context, because frankly, I don't know that the landmark designation adds anything that the conservation easement, as suggested, would do for us. In fact, I think the conservation easement does a lot more than the landmark designation probably does. But without that additional context, it's kind of tough to say.
So a couple things. One is I just confirmed with the applicant team that the conservation easement will have, so the conservation easement is there. It's there because the red-legged frog, the biological resources, but it does include some about the historic structures. So this committee could say, we don't, yes, we know it said that the policy says to designate, but we feel like this doesn't fit under landmark, and we don't recommend that it be a local landmark, and we feel like there's enough that there's going to be a conservation easement. We know there's not going to be additional development pressure. But I don't have the conservation easement. I don't believe it's been, is it written? So that is an option. You could say, you know what, we feel like this is a round peg in a square hole. We feel like there's something else coming in that at least we're going to know that there's protection to a certain extent, and we're comfortable with that, and that can be the recommendation that we would forward along. So you're not required, and the whole project doesn't go away if you don't designate it, if that makes sense.
I can speak to the conservation easement. This is a conservation easement that Ag and Open Space is going to require on the property as a condition of giving funding for the project, for acquisition of the property and also for restoration. So every conservation easement identifies certain conservation values that must be protected as part of the conservation easement. And one of those values will be the historic values. We've seen the outline of the conservation easement from Ag and Open Space. I don't have the exact language, but they recognize that this property has historic values, and the conservation easement will require protection of those historic values.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to throw out my feeling that I think it is absolutely appropriate as a landmark. I think that's the designation we have. I think this is a landmark site as much as any is. And so since that's what we have as our recognition tool, I think it's the best. It's absolutely appropriate. So I just want to throw that out. And then, so back to Heather's recommendation for expanding the area of significance or the characteristics of significance. Does anybody have any objection to how she described that? I think that's the appropriate way to go, and I would like to.
No,
that
and
recommendation.
I think in the staff report, it kind of, I thought it was odd, the staff report's a little bit different than what's in the resolution, because it says in there, just pulling it up here. The barn complex is significant due to its visual prominence and a notable feature at the city's gateway on D Street for its setting within Rolling Hill. I don't know that the resolution sort of gave that initial phrase there, and I think that Ms. Hines, is her comment too, right? Bring in this visual component. I wonder too if it makes sense in the resolution to, recommend that any conservation easement also incorporates this language, if possible, into the conservation easement, right? It gives us a little bit extra cover there on making sure that the historical significance of it, the visual characteristics of it are maintained.
Yeah, it sounds like that's will be included, but
Yeah, and we can make the recommendation. Ultimately, it's going to be Open Space District's easement, but we could make that recommendation.
Great. Okay. So I think we've all learned a lot today about the actual intent and the process, and I think it's all good news, really. But so I think. Maybe we can get a motion to make our recommendation to the Planning Commission to make their recommendation to the council to approve the landmark designation with modified conditions, including maybe we need Heather to re-summarize these, but allowing some of the latitude in the applicable development standards or the Secretary of Interior standards, and expanding the description of significance to include the site and the context integrity. So is that enough to move forward with a motion?
Can we just
Do we
second
have
that?
staff have any recommendations for helping us get there?
So what I had read previously was looking at number 9 in the resolution. I think it's really important that what is in the resolution, the landmark resolution, is clear, because at some point in the future, you may not have this, someone might be looking at the resolution and not the staff report. So yes, it references everything by reference of the staff report, but just reality. When you're looking back at things that happened, the resolution is your adoption. So number 9 currently says that the HCPC finds the the barn complex period of significance is from late 19th century to the mid 20th century and is significant due to its association with Petaluma's agricultural past, as the barn structures were used for agricultural purposes and its setting within Petaluma's rolling hills. So I think that is a good place to kind of beef that up, if you will, if you want to add more kind of about what that visual character is in terms of what you're finding as that unique, special characteristic to Petaluma. So what I had referenced, and this is on the fly, so was significant as a local landmark given its unique visual gateway of Petaluma's agricultural past as seen from D Street with the backdrop of the rolling hills. Local landmark is based on the site's unique local context and visual corridor, not individual structures or specific architectural detailing. Maybe it should keep in individual structures because the barns are important, but so maybe it would be the visual corridor, and not specific architectural detailing. That's,
Yeah, I would like it to be all of the above, so in addition to the architectural features and the
Detailing.
buildings themselves, yeah. Okay. So,
and then with the conditions, what Mr. Arrett had requested was that concrete piers be taken out as one of the contributing features, the character defining features.
agreed, I don't think those are original, actually, yeah.
So that would be, I just want to really make sure that we're all clear on your recommendations so we can tweak things before it moves on. And then I think there was also, let's see. There was also under the conditions, I believe it was condition 4. I think the intention of condition 4 was to be clear that there were things that could happen without a full discretionary review. And so that might be, instead of demonstrating compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards, it might just be something to the effect of, let me see. I thought we were trying
I
to
think that one
solve
might take some work, but just knowing that as a designated landmark, it's still subject to all the provisions of Chapter 15.
Yep.
So I think that kind of covers it, but maybe there needs to be some addition for, it's acknowledged that there's some latitude for, purposes of.
Yeah, because currently the landmark ordinance, Chapter 15, says basically almost if you're going to do anything more than take a board and replace it with the exact same thing, you have to come before the HCPC. So we could modify that condition to give a little more latitude that things like stabilizing the barns, maintenance and repairs can be done without discretionary review.
And I think this is great because we'll have a chance to review the next, it's still got to make 2 more,
Correct.
hearing milestones. So, I'll read it, and if I have comments, I'll make
We'll hear from you.
Great. Okay, so do we have enough for a motion? Isabel, do you feel comfortable with what we have?
Yes, I found today's discussion with the committee and the applicants very helpful in terms of various parties coming together and having that same reaction of preserving the backdrop, the image, and the cultural feeling. We do have the recording available so we can backtrack the discussion today. There is a lot of direction from today's hearing, and it would be fruitful to move it forward to Planning Commission, understanding that there are revisions, and you can reach out to staff as well following those agendas and additional supporting information.
Okay, thank you. Either of you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I move that we vote to approve the resolution as, with amendments as discussed in this meeting. and letting staff work out exactly what that means.
Yeah, I'd second that.
Okay, great. Can we get a vote?
Committee Member Perlis,
Aye.
Committee Member Pitangaro,
Aye.
Committee Member Whitley absent, Committee Member Van Ameren absent, Chair Reinhardt,
Aye.
all voted in favor, 3-0.
Thanks, that was good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being here and helping us get through that. Look, it's all good news. Thank you. Okay, so, absolutely, yeah. A great recommendation from Committee Member Perlis to thank the applicants of item 3 for their patience. Appreciate you sticking around through that. So let's move into item 3, which is another public hearing. Pardon me. There it is. The recommendation to the City of Petaluma Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee to conduct a public hearing to consider a resolution approving historic site plan and architectural review, subject to conditions of approval for proposed modifications, including a 2-story plus or minus 314 square foot expansion and associated exterior changes to an existing 2-story residential structure located in the Oak Hill Brewster District at 312 Liberty Street. So this is a public hearing, so we need any ex parte disclosures if we have any? No? Nope, okay, none. I just would say I visited the site. That's it. So now we'll open the public hearing and we'll begin with another presentation by our historic preservation specialist, Isabel Castellano.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for patience on going to the second item for today. Again, this presentation aligns with the staff report and a brief summary of the HCPC roles, background, project description, the staff analysis, environmental review, any public comments and recommendations. I do want to note that this project is for a residential property, a rear extension within the Oak Hill Brewster District, very similar to another project presented last month for 515 B Street. So similarly, for the HCPC's role today is determining findings and regulations for this project as a historic site plan and architectural review, conformance to the general plan, demolition resolution, the district's guidelines and standards, the Secretary of Interior Standards, and the IZO through Chapter 15, if there's any public comments, and considering those conditions of approvals. And for the background on this property, it is within the historic district, within a site under 4,000 square feet, and the building footprint is within 2,000 square feet, located in a central block of the historic district facing Liberty Street. In terms of his historic context, it has a combination of 2 historic styles within starting from the 1850s to the 1880s within the neighborhood context as well. The property was built around 1865 and recorded and has recorded information from neighborhood findings as well. The San Fire insurance maps also demonstrate through the various years its additions through the rear and the front of the property. I do want to mention that the property does have a combination of architectural styles, leaning more towards the eclectic period revival, having that storybook feeling, with features that range in and provided through an asymmetrical appearance, and features that have from a gable roof, sweeping roof styles as well, dormers, front steps, single hung windows, and horizontal siding. And the detailing does reflect more of a storybook, a cottage feel with its various transitions. Here are some images to that rear addition within the staff report and architectural drawings demonstrating where the additions have occurred and are slightly with the shed roofs and outside of the design from the front elevation. In terms of its background and context within the general plan, in the west sub area with medium density in a zoning of residential area, historic district, and again, the combination of architectural styles. Within this project, the gross area is under 4,000 feet and does increase through the rear of the property. The main entrance does currently support an elevated porch deck with raised steps, and there are, as part of the scope, does address the front steps as well. So slightly going through the elevations, and as indicated through the staff report, the work predominantly is to the rear of the property with the repair and replacement of the front deck. Within the existing and the proposed, just highlighting what the changes are within the front elevation, and that also includes the removal of an original fireplace chimney for the west elevation. Within the east elevation of the rear, you do see the various changes, but it does contain its existing heights, understanding that the roofs are also implemented within the shed roofs and gable roof as well. So just highlighting the additional of the windows with that rear extension and supporting a cohesive design to the rear of the property. Within the south elevation, again, you can see the changes continuing the existing roof line, not removing the original dormer, the original gable roofs, so it keeps that detailing from the south elevation. And again, with the addition on the second floor, it also includes the addition to the roof and the skylights and the windows as well, centering it on the south elevation. And again, the repair and alterations to the front deck. And quickly through the south elevation, we do see the extension again from the ridge line and the skylight as well with a shed dormer roof. And the addition of 2 windows and relocation of a smaller window. And again, the steps. From the staff analysis, the standards of review again go through the general plan and the historic demolition resolution. It adds to the property and only removes the former rear additions. It does not affect the front elevation in terms of its architectural features. And compliance with the historic district guidelines and standards, it does comply with the architectural standards. The scope does not include any additional features such as lighting and landscape, but part of this project is supporting any minor additions through administrative review and supporting the project if those do come up as part of the rear extension. Briefly, through the Secretary of Interior standards, the property use remains the same. The architectural styles remains the same with the shingle and eclectic period revival style. There's no faults of historic development. It just continues what we have at present. And we understand that the historic features have evolved through the various years as documented through the Sanborn maps and through the existing condition photographs as well. It continues the existing roofing and siding and trim. And again, through finalizing the Secretary of Interior standards, the installation for the new asphalt shingle roof for that rear expansion, and it does remove an existing chimney. However, it's not original to the property. No chemical or physical treatments is a part of the scope. And again, with the minor excavation, we do have a condition to support and direct for any archaeological resources that might come if undisturbed. And the scope primarily, again, focuses on the rear for maximum height and matches existing materials. And this could be removed without impacting the overall character and integrity of the property. Finalizing compliance with IZO for Chapter 15, and because this is a historic site plan and architectural review, there's also compliance with Chapter 24, understanding the architectural style, sitting, residential use, and features like ridgeline, bulk, and height and color remain the same. With the environmental review through CEQA, it does have a categorical exemption because it's a historic facility, it's existing facility, and it's already a historic resource in a historic district. Through the public comments, there was a neighborhood outreach meeting held in January as a virtual Zoom meeting with one in attendance, and we also had the architect and the property owners. The public noticing also include first publishing of the hearing in June through the Argus Courier, with the understanding of the requirement for on-site signage and the additional request to continue the item by the applicant. It was continued to today for September 5th of a public hearing. It did meet the mailed notice requirement and sent out with today's date to properties within 500 feet, and it did have the property does have on-site signage for today's hearing. From the draft of this presentation, no public comments were received. And following the SPAR application, staff recommends adoption with a resolution and subject to conditions of approval for this rear expansion at 312 Liberty Street. Again, the various conditions of approval are really to support the expansion and if there's anticipation for any physical treatments and also any undisturbed findings through the minor excavations, and to follow with the rear expansion, and any considerations for future of lighting features and minor landscape work that may fall through and subject to administrative review and approval. And this concludes my presentation for today. I do want to note that the property owners are present and their architect is present as well. And to introduce them, I do have Carolyn Walker Davis, the architect, and the property owners, Phyllis Story and Ron Story. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Isabel, would the applicants like to add anything? Great, good. Okay, so let's see, do any committee members have questions of staff or the applicant? No? Okay, I have just one, Isabel. It's kind of theoretical, but just the discussion of the height. I know this project isn't proposing to change the height, but the description says it's within 20% of the adjacent properties or something like that, but just curious, how is the maximum height established for something like this, like if they want to go taller?
Right, so for this property, it extends the existing height and the existing ridgeline. That 20% is, let's say they have a rear expansion of 3 stories, or an addition of another structure, or a new construction on a new site, or on a subdivided site in a historic district. It's really to understand the context and not to put something that's out of place, to take in the average between the 2 properties adjacent to it.
Okay, so that would be the allowable height limit would be within 20% of the average of the 2 adjacent properties?
That's how the historic district guidelines
Yeah.
are set in place. But again, we do need to understand on a case-by-case basis, because there could be various scenarios of a 1-story and a 3-story.
Yeah.
So it's really for guidance. So we have that there in place.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other questions from me. We have an opportunity for public comment. I don't see anybody in the chamber. Okay, so the public comment period hereby opened and closed. Did we receive any comments?
We received no public comments for this item prior to the meeting.
Great, thank you. Okay, Good. Seeing no one to speak, then I think we'll bring it back to the committee for any discussion. Who would like to begin? Committee Member Perlis?
I'll just say that it's a very nicely designed project. It's minimally intrusive from the street, and yet I think it'll, if well executed by whoever does the building, will serve the owners very well in terms of the extra space that they're going to, living room that they're going to get.
Committee Member Pitangaro?
Yeah, nothing to add, just clean project, looks good.
Okay, I got to be the bad guy then, because I found one thing though, is that the design guidelines specifically call out aluminum siding as a material that's not to be used in the district. So I don't know that we have the authority to kind of waive that and say it's okay. So I think that an alternative, that compliant material needs to be used instead of the aluminum siding. I know you have it now, but it's specifically called out in the guidelines. So I would say, you know, you could work that out administratively with staff, but I think that needs to change. Otherwise, I agree. I think it's a fine addition. I really thank you for your patience both today and for going through the process. You know, I appreciate that you've done the right thing too.
Chair Reinhardt, I do want to place a comment for the siding condition. We are aware that the original siding is not on the property, that the aluminum siding is existing there. So there was consideration of the material and the proper use, and we can continue that communications through administrative review and taking understanding of what the materials in place and what's appropriate and the appearance for a seamless look to the rear expansion.
Okay, that sounds fine. I just, you know, even though it's existing, it obviously it was either installed before the guidelines were written or was not compliant then, so it's not now. So just, I don't think we can add more. Again, yeah, thank you. Okay, so with that, then we have a motion to approve the resolution in front of us.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to approve the resolution as provided.
Second.
Okay, made by Committee Member Pitgaro and seconded by Committee Member Perlis. How about a vote?
Committee Member Perlis,
Aye.
Committee Member Pitangaro,
Aye.
Committee Member Whitley absent, Committee Member Van Omeren absent, Chair Reinhardt,
Aye.
3 voted in favor.
Great,
Motion
thank
passed.
you. Thanks again for your patience and for doing the right thing. All right, appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, that closes meeting item number 3, and now we have an opportunity for committee comment. Do we have any committee members wishing to comment?
None?
Okay. Committee Member Perlis? None? Okay. I just have an update on our ad hoc committee. We're at a point where we have kind of a draft summary of recommendations that the subcommittee is going to meet next week, and hopefully soon thereafter we're going to forward them on to Isabel and Andrew, and looking forward to bringing that to the committee as a whole. I think, you know, I'd say we found some very specific, simple recommendations, but we also found some kind of larger discussion items. So I'm hoping that it can be not only, you know, something that we discuss immediate action, but also just some bigger picture discussions about, you know, future goals and also what's the committee's position on some items. So anyway, looking forward to moving that. Sorry it's taking too long. I do think we put a sunset on the ad hoc subcommittee life, and I don't know if on the next meeting we need to have an action to extend it.
Couldn't hurt. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, let's look that up. Otherwise, nothing more for me. I think that's time to move over to staff comment and turn it over to planning manager for the planning manager's report. Mr.
Great, thank you, Chair. Very brief staff comments or reports or report this evening. We'll look forward to getting the ad hoc recommendations and reviewing those. We do want to follow up on the request from Larry Lobel for a landmark designation analysis. And I think this evening's, I appreciate your comment about the landmark designation, and I think it's, and maybe the suitability of it to certain projects, and I think perhaps that's what we found when we considered Mr. Lobel's request. We did advise Mr. Lobel that an application could be submitted, that the application would have to be accompanied by a historic resource evaluation, and that the applicant would have to provide financial support for both preparation of the historic resource evaluation as well as cost recovery for review of the landmark designation application. And as well as the to understand that what a historic resource evaluation might determine could be that there was not culturally significant and not suitable for designation. So he understood and appreciated the initial analysis. What we did tell him that we would do is work with the committee as we work through the structures of merit program that the committee has discussed and see if there's an opportunity to broaden that program as it moves forward to include locations of cultural significance in the city. And then, and to be able to recognize those locations or those special events, as well as we would look at how the existing plaque on the corner was the decision process to install that existing monument that's located there on that corner. It would be what the northeast corner of Washington and Petaluma Boulevard, I believe. And so, and he appreciated that, so we're continuing to research, and we'll bring those recommendations back to the committee after we've completed that research.
Great, thank you. Following up on that a little bit, you know, it seems like what he needs is a monument more than a landmark. And I know that we have monuments around the city, you know, interpretive signs and things like the Balshaw Bridge has a half dozen, the D Street Bridge has 3 or 4. And it just seems like he just doesn't know what he needs, but he's maybe asking for the wrong thing. So I don't know if that's something, if he just went to council with a request for, can I put a monument on city property?
Sure, and I think that's where we now fully understand his intent and what his goal is, and we do want to support that, and similar, like you just pointed out with the Balshaw Bridge and such. So we just need to find that pathway for him and look at how some of these other recognitions were pursued and were decided upon, and then we can advise him accordingly.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for that update. Yeah. Any other
Oh, no,
staff
that's all, Chair.
comments?
Thank
Okay,
you.
none. And any other committee member questions or anything? Okay. So with that, then we are adjourned at what looks like about 6:07 p.m. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.